it is October, so both episodes this month will be featuring old texts that I found concerning witchcraft. They are a little connected because they both come from modern day United Kingdom, but they're also in two completely different places. So they're not like identical and they concern different things. One of them is going to be more theoretical, and the one that we are reading today is going to be more hands-on. Actually, the texts are not really concerning witchcraft. They are concerning witch hunts, because when you think about it, there wasn't much actual witchcraft involved in those. I think there is a lot of myths nowadays surrounding witch hunting, and we try to make it into this mysterious, sexy thing where beautiful young women were accused of being witches because they knew basic math, which is not exactly what happened and what went down. The reality of witch hunts, the majority of which happened in the 16th and 17th century. So anyone that's like, yeah, medieval witch hunts, that was not that hot back then. It was not really, like, people had bigger issues. Now, the actual witch hunt wave was definitely 17th century, and it was much less dramatic and just much more sad than what we think it to be. And to me, it really changes perspective when I think about how the society back then that people lived in was just fueled by fear. They didn't have definite answers for anything. We nowadays do have those answers thanks to science. And back then, they genuinely believed that there was a whole other immaterial world that was surrounding them. And that was a world that wished them harm. They believed that there was a secret society that anyone surrounding them could be involved with and could wish them bad. Like, imagine your child suddenly falls ill and you literally have no answers. You don't know what caused it. You don't know what it is. You don't know how long it's going to go on for. You don't know if the child is going to survive. And then someone says, like, I think I saw your neighbor whispering something when she passed your door. Now, come on, I would be suspicious too. I would also be like, wait a minute, did you curse my son? People controlled by fear are really easy to manipulate. So with those, I definitely put less blame on what went down with witch hunting, because it wasn't just malice. It was genuinely people fearing for their lives or suspecting that someone is trying to ruin their lives. However, there were definitely people that maybe didn't even believe in witchcraft themselves or were powerful enough to not care about it, but they saw witch hunts as an easy way to just get rid of someone they like, just like ruin someone's life, someone's reputation, make their lives miserable. And those people, they, on the other hand, get no compassion from me. But also, a lot of the myths are simply not true. So, for example, depending on the culture, men got accused too. In most cases, it was about like 15% of the accused, so not much, but still, it's not like 1%. There were a lot of male victims as well. And in some places like the Baltics or Scandinavia, the male victims of witch hunts actually made up about half of the accused or even more. And in Iceland, for example, they made up 90% of the executed for witchcraft. So it definitely varied from places to places. It wasn't only young, beautiful women that were persecuted, as the movies would want us to believe. It was often much, much more sad. It was just an old dude. Second of all, when women were accused, it wasn't just like sexy vixens that were mysteriously beautiful and liked herbology. It was usually just like lonely old women that someone had beef with. They didn't always dabble in healing also. For example, out of 4,000 people accused of witchcraft in Scotland, only 9 individuals were midwives and 4% of the accused were into folk healing. So majority of them did not even have anything to do with being like local healers or dabbling in folk medicine. And another thing is torture that is often mentioned when it comes to witch hunts. It didn't have to include anything drastic, like getting drowned or receiving any kind of bodily harm. But a lot of the time, it was just simply keeping the accused awake. So obviously, after a while, they will be so sleep deprived that they will just start hallucinating. And that is why some of the recorded confessions just sound so wild. And this was a torture method that was often implemented by Matthew Hopkins, who was the infamous witch finder general in the 17th century. He was like obsessed with witch hunts, and he implemented that method a lot. So just not letting your victim sleep, so then they would basically say anything. And also it's important to note that at the root of witch hunts, it wasn't just fear, but it was also politics. So there is a reason why it all erupted in like late 16th, early 17th century. It was a time of extreme religious tensions. There were a lot of breakaway religions all of a sudden. Protestants were beefing with Catholics. Huguenots were getting slaughtered. Calvinists were all the rage. It's just everyone was fighting with everyone. And basically they were all part of the same religion, but it just couldn't get along for some reason. So because it was also heavily involved with politics at the time, you know, different monarchs implementing different parts of Christianity basically to their people, this was a serious problem. And today we are focusing on witch trials in Guernsey, which, as you probably know, is an island located between France and the UK. And Guernsey was also in the middle of those religious debates, people getting prosecuted, slaughtered, all that. So no wonder that Guernsey saw a wave of witch trials between mid-16th and mid-17th century. And interestingly, the accused in those witch trials were rarely just simple individuals, and the accusations were usually covering several members of the island families. So the scholars have a theory that people were just accusing each other out of spite. Like, if one family accused another family, then that family was like, yeah, and you know what? Your cousins are also to blame. So it just got a little hysterical. If you had a beef with a family, you could just accuse them of witchcraft. It was that simple. What we're reading now is a 19th century translation of the Guernsey witch trial papers. And we are actually reading confessions of the 3 accused women from 1617. So first off, we're going to start with like a short intro from the 19th century edition. So it's like an intro for anyone that was reading it in the 19th century. The belief in magic and witchcraft was almost universal in the Middle Ages. I think they're referring to 17th century as Middle Ages here, but then it was 19th century, so they probably didn't refer to their own era as Victorian either. And affected every class of society and all sorts and conditions of men. In our own country, as evidenced by our judicial records, the unreasoning credulity which swept across the civilized world rose to high water mark, assisted as it was by the efforts of that wise fool of a king, James I of England and VI of Scotland. This is a translation from the official records of the Royal Court of Guernsey, of the trial of 3 women for witchcraft in 1617. Colette de Mont, widow of Jean Becket, Marie, her daughter, wife of Pierre Massy, and Isabel Becket, wife of Jean de Moine, being by common rumor and report for a long time past addicted to the damnable art of witchcraft, and the same being thereupon seized and apprehended by the officers of His Majesty James I, after voluntarily submitting themselves, both upon the general inquest of the country, and after having been several times brought up before the court, heard, examined, and confronted, upon a great number of depositions made and produced before the court by the said officers, from which it is clear and evident that for many years past, the aforesaid women have practiced the diabolical art of witchcraft, by having not only cast their spells upon inanimate objects, but also by having retained in languor, through strange diseases, many persons and beasts, and also cruelly hurt a great number of men, women, and children, and caused the death of many animals, as recorded in the informations thereupon led. it follows that they are clearly convicted and proved to be witches. In expiation of which crime, it has been ordered by the court that the said women shall be presently conducted with halters about their necks to the usual place of punishment, and shall there be fastened by the executioner to gallows and be hanged, strangled, killed, and burnt until their flesh and bones are reduced to ashes, and the ashes shall be scattered. And all their goods, chattels, and estates, if any such exist, shall be forfeited to His Majesty. In order to make them disclose their accomplices, they shall be put to question before the court, previous to being executed. If you think that sounds awful, let it be known that that was considered a good punishment because they weren't burnt alive, they were burnt after they were killed. So they actually considered themselves to be much more civil than some places because they were like, we're only burning their bodies after they're already dead. So that kind of shows you how messed up it all was. But also, it's interesting because that's quite a heavy punishment. A lot of the accused in the islands were just banished from the island. It was that simple. But with these, I mean, that's as severe as you get, obviously. Okay, let's start with the confession of Colette Dumont. First, the said Colette, immediately after the said sentence was pronounced, and before leaving the court, freely admitted that she was a witch. At the same time, not wishing to specify the crimes which she had committed, she was taken, along with the others, to the torture chamber, and the said question being applied to her, she confessed that she was quite young when the devil, in the form of a cat, appeared to her in the parish of Torteval, as she was returning from her cattle, it being still daylight, and that he took occasion to lead her astray by inciting her to avenge herself on one of her neighbors, with whom she was then at enmity, on account of some damage which she had suffered through the cattle of the latter. That since then, when she had a quarrel with anyone, he appeared to her in the aforesaid form, and sometimes in the form of a dog, inducing her to take vengeance upon those who had angered her, persuading her to cause the death of persons and cattle. Wild. So let's rewind. I am assuming that someone's cattle just started dying and they were like, we had beef with Colette, so it must be Colette because she has suffered damage from our cattle, so 100% she cursed our cows, and that's why they're dying. And now we're dying as well. That's all because of her. I also find it interesting that in a lot of those accounts, in a lot of those confessions, or not really confessions, but just the way they saw things was that the devil took form of something. And why would it take form of a dog? Like, that's the most innocent thing you can think of. And even nowadays, whenever they're trying to warm up someone's appearance on TV, or whenever there is a character that the writers want you to think well of, they give them a dog. Like a cat, okay, there is a lot of prejudice about cats, there is a lot of myths about cats, a lot of legends surrounding cats, so that makes sense. But a dog, honestly, like, was that just a Jack Russell Terrier going like, yeah, kill the cows? Like, come on. That the devil, having come to fetch her that she might go to the Sabbath, called for her without anyone perceiving it, and gave her a certain black ointment, with which, after having stripped herself, she rubbed her back, belly, and stomach. And then, having again put on her clothes, she went out of her door, when she was immediately carried through the air at a great speed. And she found herself in an instant at the place of the Sabbath, which was sometimes near the parochial burial ground, and at other times near the seashore, in the neighborhood of Roquain Castle, where upon arrival she met often 15 or 16 wizards and witches, with the devils, who were there in the form of dogs, cats, and hares. Which wizards and witches she was unable to recognize, because they were all blackened and disfigured. It was true, however, that she had heard the devil summon them by their names, and she remembered, among others, those of Thaile and Hardy. So basically, I think the most interesting part for me is stepping out of her door and being carried through the air at a great speed, because it just sounds like someone was having a trip, honestly. But also, that's basically flying, right? Again, with the devils. So it wasn't just one devil that took form of a dog, a cat, whatever. It was like different demons, basically, that were there in multiple numbers, which is not what I would suspect it to be. I thought they just thought it's like the devil, but here it says with the devils who were there in form of dogs, cats, and hares, which again sounds so not threatening. It's like literally the softest, cutest animals you can think of. Like I would understand if it was like wild boars and goats and stuff like that. But honestly, cats and hares, come on, that's so cute. But also when she is like, yeah, it's true, however, that she heard the devil summon them by their names. I literally can hear the question being like, did you hear them summon them by their names? Did you hear the names of Fele and Hardy? And she was like, yeah, whatever you say. She confessed that on entering the Sabbath, the devil wishing to summon them commenced with her sometimes. Admitted that her daughter Mary, wife of Massey, now condemned for a similar crime, was a witch, and that she took her twice to the Sabbath with her. At the Sabbath, after having worshipped the devil, who used to stand up on his hind legs, they had connection with him under the form of a dog, and then they danced back to back. Is that what I think it is? Did they make her confess to bestiality, basically? But also, standing up on his hind legs as a dog, that sounds even more funny. Like nothing about this is threatening. Maybe the part where everyone is covered in something black and disfigured, but honestly, a dog standing on its hind legs? Come on. And after having danced, they drank wine. She did not know what color it was, which the devil poured out of a jug into a silver or pewter goblet, which wine did not seem to her so good as that which was usually drunk. They also ate white bread, which he presented to them. She had never seen any salt at the Sabbath. A lot of these confessions just sound like a yes and no answers to whatever they were saying. Was there salt at the Sabbath? No. What color was the wine? I don't know. Was the goblet silver? I don't remember. Was the wine good? No. And also, which wine did not seem to her so good as that which was usually drunk? It's such a random detail to include while you're confessing to something that will end up in your demise. But all of it, it just, to me, it echoes the questions or suggestions that were made. Confessed that the devil had charged her to call, as she passed, for Isabel the Moine, when she came to the Sabbath, which she had done several times. On leaving the Sabbath, the devil incited her to commit various evil deeds. And came to that effect, he gave her certain black powders, which he ordered her to throw upon such persons and cattle as she wished. With this powder, she perpetrated several wicked acts, which she did not remember. Among others, she threw some upon Mr. Dalbelly parish minister, and was the occasion of his death by these means. Interesting. So we have a killer powder. We have a murder weapon that is not just saying a spell or giving someone some herbs, but is the black powder of death. This is interesting. With this same powder, she bewitched the wife of Jean Moge, but denied that the woman's death was caused by it. She also touched on the side and threw some of this powder over the deceased wife of Mr. Perchard, the minister who succeeded the said Dolbell in the parish. She being enceinte at the time, enceinte meaning pregnant, and so caused the death of her and her infant. She did not know that the deceased woman had given her any cause for doing so. Upon the refusal of the wife of Collis Totevin to give her some milk, she caused her cow to dry up by throwing upon it some of this powder, which cow she afterwards cured again by making it eat some bran and some terrestrial herb that the devil gave her. It sounds a little messy, like not to judge someone's confessions, but I'm just thinking 90% of her confessions were probably suggested by whoever was interrogating her. So she caused the death of the parish minister. She bewitched the wife of someone else, but said that she didn't cause her death, which is interesting. Like, if you're trying to get the torture ended, I would assume that you would just say yes to everything. Yeah, I did that. Just let me go. But in this case, she's like, no, I didn't do that. Actually, I did something else. And she supposedly caused the death of someone else, like of a woman that was pregnant, and then caused a cow to dry up. So again, a lot of it has to do with farming, with animals, with cattle, with all of these things that people depended on that they had no control over. So if your cow just stopped giving you milk, what would be a reasonable explanation back then? Obviously, someone cursed it. Obviously, someone threw some black powder over your cow and it caused her to dry up. Anyway, the next confession is that of Mary Becket. Or Becket, I don't know. Mary, wife of Pierre Massey, after sentence of death which had been pronounced against her, having been put to the question, confessed that she was a witch, and that at the persuasion of the devil, who appeared to her in the form of a dog, she gave herself to him. That when she gave herself to him, he took her by the hand with his paw, please. Oh my God. That she used to anoint herself with the same ointment as her mother used, and had been to the Sabbath upon the bank near Rocaine Castle with her, where there was no one but the devil and her, as it seemed, in the aforesaid form in which she had seen him several times. She was also at the Sabbath on one occasion, among others, in the road near Colles Totovins. Every time that she went to the Sabbath, the devil came to her, and it seemed as though he transformed her into a female dog. I just cannot with all the dog descriptions. Like, you're trying to tell me that a dog taking your hand with his paw is scary, it's terrifying, it's the devil? Be for real. It sounds like a meme. It also sounds like they made the mother confess first. They forced her into saying that her daughter is a witch, and then they went to the daughter. They told her everything that the mother said, and the daughter just said, yeah, it was the same for me. Yeah, he was also in the form of a dog. It was the same Sabbath. It was at that place. So no wonder everything matches, because they would just repeat whatever she said. She said that upon the shore, near the said Rocaine, the devil, in the form of a dog, having had connection with her, gave her bread and wine, which she ate and drank. The devil gave her certain powders, which powders he put into her hand, for her to throw upon those whom he ordered her. She threw some of them by his orders upon persons and cattle, notably upon the child of Pierre Berot, upon the wife of Jean Bourges, while she was enceinte, upon the child of Leonard Le Mesurier. So basically, whoever died or got sick on the island, they could put the blame on them. But also, what was with their obsession of them having what I'm assuming is a sexual relationship with the devil in the form of a dog? Because that sounds like whoever was interrogating them had a thing for that, honestly. Why do they keep repeating that? This confession is really short, and it's the saddest for me because obviously she was probably just dragged into this by accident. She didn't have beef with any of these people. It doesn't even say that she had reasons to wish those people harm like her mother did. Like, her mother was clearly involved in some disputes with other people. And with her daughter, it's just, yeah, she was given powders and she was told whoever the devil wanted to harm. So it clearly was not even her personal beef that got her into this. It was just because she was related to someone that was accused, which honestly sucks. And then the last confession is that of Isabel Becket. Isabel, wife of Jean de Moyne, having been put to the question, at once confessed that she was a witch, and that upon her getting into a quarrel with the woman Girard, who was her sister-in-law, the devil, in the form of a hare, took occasion to tempt her, appearing to her in broad daylight in a road near her house, and persuading and inciting her to give herself to him, and that he would help her to avenge herself on the said Girard and everybody else, to which persuasion she would not at the moment condescend to yield. so he at once disappeared. But very soon he came again to her in the same road, and pursuing his previous argument, exhorted her in the same terms as above. That done, he left her and went away, after having previously given her a sackful of parsnips. She then took a certain black powder wrapped in a cloth in which he placed it, which powder she kept by her. So she has a very clever tactic in which she's like trying to describe it in a way that makes it sound like she was slowly convinced. So it took him several tries to actually get her to agree to work with him, basically, which could have affected the way that she was treated by whoever was at court at the time. So if it sounded like it was against her will and that she was commenced to it by some evil forces, it would probably be a little easier to make it sound like she's innocent. Obviously, it didn't help her because we already know that all 3 women were sentenced to death, but it's a smart tactic by someone who is under torture at the time, obviously. So probably not thinking very clearly. He appeared to her another time under the same form in the town district, inciting her anew to give herself to him. But she not wishing to comply, he next made a request to her to give him some living animal, whereupon she returned to her dwelling and fetched a chicken, which she carried to him to the same place where she had left him, and he took it. And after having thanked her, he made an appointment for her to be present the next morning before daylight at the Sabbath, promising that he would send for her. According to which promise, during the ensuing night, the old woman Colette de Mont came to fetch her, and gave her some black ointment which she had had from the devil. With this, after having stripped herself, she anointed her back and belly. Then, having dressed herself again, she went out of her house door, when she was instantly caught up and carried across hedges and bushes to the bank on the seashore, in the neighborhood of Rocaine Castle, the usual place where the devil kept his Sabbath. The usual place? You guys made it up. Someone probably said it first, and then everyone else was just asked, did you take part in the Sabbath on, like, near Rocaine Castle? And everyone's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And they were like, see, I told you. This is so stupid. And again, everything that the first woman said was then repeated to the other women. And they were like, yeah, I did the same. I had the black ointment and I used it on my back and belly. If those 3 investigations were held at the same time in different rooms, that would be much more impressive. That would actually make me believe that they did all this. But clearly it wasn't the case. Also, why would the devil give her a sack full of parsnips and black powder wrapped in a cloth? Like, I can imagine just him in his, like, hellish dwellings being like, oh, let me put this in a cloth. Oh, this is nice. Yeah, let me use a string to wrap it. Like, slay crafty queen. Anyway, no sooner had she arrived there than the devil came to her in the form of a dog, with 2 great horns sticking up, and with one of his paws, which seemed to her like hands, took her by the hand, and calling her by her name, told her that she was welcome. Huh? Okay, so he's a dog, but he also has horns, but he also has paws that look like hands? That sounds like cosplay, my guy. Then immediately the devil made her kneel down, while he himself stood up on his hind legs. He then made her express detestation of the Eternal in these words, I renounce God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, and then caused her to worship and invoke himself in these terms, Our great Master, help us, with a special compact to be faithful to him. And when this was done, he had connection with her in the aforesaid form of a dog, but a little larger. Why all the details surrounding the dog and whatever he did with them? Like, someone had a fetish, honestly. Then she and the others danced with him back to back. After having danced, the devil poured out of a jug some black wine, which he presented to them in a wooden bowl, from which she drank, but it did not seem to her so good as the wine which is usually drunk. There was also bread, but she did not eat any. confessed that she gave herself to him for a month. They returned from the Sabbath in the same manner that they went there. Again, repeating the thing about the wine not being good. Like they desperately wanted the wine that the devil was serving to be bad, which is so funny to me. Why was the black wine in a wooden bowl? No idea. Why do they keep dancing back to back? I'm assuming that's one of the myths that is being repeated about like what goes on at these Sabbaths. The second time she was at the Sabbath was after the old woman Colette had been to fetch her, and she anointed herself with the ointment as above stated, declared that on entering the Sabbath, she again had connection with the devil and danced with him. After having danced, and upon his solicitation to prolong the time, she gave herself to him. For 3 years at the Sabbath, the devil used to summon the wizards and witches in regular order. She remembered very well having heard him call the old woman Colette the first in these terms: Madame the old woman Becket, then the woman Falaise, and afterwards the woman Hardy. He also called Marie the wife of Massey and daughter of the said Colette. Said that after them she herself was called by the devil, in these terms: the little Becket. She also heard him call there Colas Becket's son of the said old woman, who Colas held her by the hand in dancing, and someone, a woman, whom she did not know, held her by the other hand. There were about 6 others there she did not know. The said old woman was always nearest to the devil. Occasionally, while some were dancing, others were having connection with the devils in the form of dogs. They remain at the Sabbath about 3 or 4 hours, not more. Okay, she dropped some names. I'm assuming she must have been tortured pretty bad, or she was just really scared. But she dropped some names that they probably gave her. They were like, did you hear the name of Mary, the wife of Massey? And she was like, yeah, I guess. Yeah, there is a mention of a man at the Sabbath. So as I said, it wasn't unusual for men to be involved. While at the Sabbath, the devil marked her at the upper part of the thigh, which mark having been examined by the midwives, they reported that they had stuck a small pin deeply into it, and that she had not felt it, and that no blood had issued. She did not know in what part the devil had marked the others. Wait, what? So she had a mark that they thought is a pin? Or maybe she just had a splinter, and they were like, yeah, that's the devil's mark. Those who came first to the place of the Sabbath waited for the others, and all the wizards and witches appeared in their proper forms, but blackened and disfigured so that they could not be recognized. This is also a very smart thing to do, just say that the way they appeared was impossible to decipher who they were. It didn't quite work on not hearing names, like clearly they found a way to get them to confess the actual names by saying, oh, maybe the devil called there by their names, even though you couldn't see who they are. But then they could be like, yeah, but I wasn't 100% sure if it was them because they were blackened and disfigured. The devil appeared sometimes in the form of a goat at the Sabbath. She never saw him in other forms. On their departure, he made them kiss him behind and asked them when they would come again. Wait, appeared in the form of a goat and she never saw him in other forms? You just said he looked like a dog. Anyway, he exhorted them always to be true to him and to do evil deeds, and to this end he gave them certain black powders wrapped in a cloth, for them to throw upon those whom they wished to bewitch. On leaving the Sabbath, the devil went away in one direction and they in the other, after he had taken them all by the hand. Wait, so he just walked home? Are you kidding me? This is so funny. He's just like, bye guys, see you next time. This was so much fun. We have to do this again. At the instigation of the devil, she threw some of the powder over several persons and cattle, notably over Jean Jaharich when he came to her house to look for a pig, over the child of James Gallimu and over others, over the cattle of Bruart and of others. So basically whatever cattle or pigs or people died, that's on them. That's the black powder. Which is scary to think about because that could just go on and on and on. It was the devil that was seen at the said Gallienne's house in the form of a rat and a weasel, she herself being then in the neighborhood of Gallienne's house. And he, the devil, came to her in the form of a man and struck her several blows on the face and head, by which she was bruised and torn in the way that she was seen the next day by Thomas Scayer. And she believed that the cause of this maltreatment was because she would not go with the devil to the house of the said Gallienne. Again, very smart, letting them know that if she did not follow his instructions, she would actually get harmed in a way. So she was sort of forced to do it. This argument didn't work on them, obviously, but it was worth a try. She never went to the Sabbath, except when her husband remained all night fishing at sea. Whenever she wanted to bewitch anyone and her powder happened to have been all used up, the devil appeared to her and told her to go to such a place, which he named, for some more. And when she did so, she never failed to find it there. This is the end of her confession, basically. So, yep, that's what the witches of Guernsey did, apparently. Though, again, it's almost as if someone wrote those confessions for them, then just ask them yes and no questions, and that's the confession, basically. But also, let's rewind. Let's go back to the rat and the weasel being the devil. It says it was the devil that was seen at the Gallienne's house in the form of a rat and a weasel. So Gallienne saw a rat and a weasel. He freaked out and he was like, oh my God, it has to be the devil. Like, there is no way. I never get rats. What the hell is this? Something's running around my room. Okay, I shouldn't be laughing because it's actually very tragic. We have to remember that by the end of the day, they still got basically murdered for something they obviously did not do. And this paranoia lasted another couple of decades, so they weren't the last victims of the Guernsey witch hunts. In the end, during that 100-year period between 1560 and 1660, 65 people were tried for witchcraft, and 33 of those people in the Channel Islands were executed, which is why the Channel Islands have been described as the witch hunting capital of Europe, which, probably considering the small population there, was quite a big percentage, but I think compared to places like Scotland or England, it was probably still pretty low. But I'm also thinking, was the fact that it was islands, that they felt isolated, that it was small communities, could that also contribute to the paranoia that they were experiencing? For 100 years, basically, that's a really long period. Usually it was like decades of increased witch hunt activities, but this is like 100 years of believing that whatever happened on the island was a fault of some unnatural forces, or in this case, black powder, which is also insane. I wonder also if there was some sort of a powder on the island that people thought looked suspicious, and that was the beginning of this myth. But basically, it must have been a difficult time to be an islander back then, especially in the Channel Islands, especially in Guernsey. Not only were you completely isolated from anything that was going on in Europe, but also you lived in fear 99% of the time. So it probably was not a fun time. I do think the subject of witchcraft and witch hunting back then is fascinating, also from like a psychological perspective, like the thought process that goes behind it, the mechanism that made it be that bad in the first place. Again, all of the sociological factors as well, what the society at the time was like, what the society was like in that particular place, the tensions between all the religions, the tensions between men and women, all that obviously was a factor as well. So it's definitely a fascinating topic that is probably enough to be a podcast on its own. So we'll end this here and I'll hear you in another episode. Hopefully it will be a little less gruesome, but as I said, it's also going to revolve around witchcraft, but in a different font, in a different flavor. So I'll hear you in the next episode. Bye!